Okay, welcome, welcome. Today is our last class of the residential listing agreement module. We're going to start up next month with seller disclosures. So today we are going to be talking about the cancellation of listing, the modification of terms. We're going to touch briefly again on the property images agreement because there seems to be some confusion as to whether or not you need this form, property image agreement, 2-page form.
Is it mandatory for us?
It's mandatory, right. It's mandatory. The disclosure information advisory is mandatory. We talked about that at the beginning of this module. The Keller-Williams addendum and the affiliated business disclosure are mandatory. So just going to touch on these forms towards the end of class. But we're going to talk about modification of terms and cancellation of listing. So I'm going to ask you to bring in, if you don't already have a modification of terms in your template, let's go up to listing templates. And if you don't already have a modification of terms in your listing template, pull it in right now. When I redid my listing template, I forgot to bring in the modification of terms. I like to have it in the listing template because you may need it. It's kind of like the FLD, the lead-based paint disclosure for properties built prior to 1978. It's good to have it there in case you need it, and if you don't need it, you can delete it out of your template. So modification of terms. Again, I just changed my template. There is no save button. I just need to go back, and now I'm back at my template list. And if I go into my listing template, we can see that the modification of terms is still there. So when you add something to a template, this is just brief template review. When you add something to a template, you do not have to save the template. There is no save button for saving your template. So when you go back into your transaction, now of course the modification of terms is not in my transaction because it's in the template, because this template has already been applied. If you apply a template, all of the forms that are in that template will show up in the transaction. If you already have a transaction started with a template there and you change that template, the form doesn't magically come in because you changed the template. Because the template that you used when you applied it to that transaction did not have that form. Okay? So in my documents, in my transaction that we're using, the modification of terms is there because I brought it in manually. And that's what we're going to take a peek at right now. It's a very easy form. It's a very simple form. We touched on it briefly last week when we were talking about the SELM, and I was explaining to you that when you have an exclusion, the SELM, when you have that, and you're going to need to change it for some reason, the SELM has to go up to the board with your residential listing agreement. You're excluding the listing because you're taking pictures or things have to be done to the property before you go live with that listing. So the SELM is what we worked on last week. And I said, if you go beyond your SELM date of excluding the listing, you need to do a modification of terms to the SELM and upload that with the original SELM to the board, letting them know that, oh, by the way, we are not going to go live with this listing on the date that is on the SELM that says we are going to go live with it. Here's an SELM extending the listing, extending the date on that SELM. So you use the modification of terms for three things, typically. You're going to change the price, and since we're not talking about the SELM today, we're going to say that we're just going to talk about the listing agreement. You can use the modification of terms rather to change the price. So if you have one price on your residential listing agreement, you've gone into the MLS with a price, and a month down the road you don't have any offers, it's time to lower that price, right? Because what are the things that influence properties and the sale of properties? Anybody know? I won't call on you, Penny.
Thank you. I told her that.
Okay, so there are three things that typically influence a price that you just determine to list a home at and the price that it is going to sell at. Those three things are location. That's when they say location, location, location. You cannot change the location of the listing. You can't pick up that house and move it to Bel Air. It's not gonna happen. If it did, you might be able to sell it at a higher price. You cannot change the location. Second thing, anybody? Harry, what's the second thing? Harry Chung, what's the second thing?
Condition.
Thank you. Harry Chung gets a free phone ring. I won't charge you if your phone goes off. Condition. Condition is generally not something you can change either. The condition of the house. Is it 40 years old? Is it 10 years old? Is it nicely decorated? Is it a dump? Sorry, we run into those too. The people can't, for whatever reason, keep the home up or haven't kept it up. The condition is something that generally cannot be changed very easily. It can be changed. You can certainly do things, but most sellers aren't going to want to invest the $10,000 or $15,000 it's going to take to change the condition of the home. So you've got price, you've got location, you've got condition. The third thing that generally affects housing sales is the price. The price, it can be changed. That can be changed, and essentially buyers determine what price a home is going to sell at. When you're doing your comps for your listings, you look at all those active properties on the market, and your seller says, I want a price higher than that one because my home is in better shape than that one. That's all well and good. However, that's not what determines what sells. It's actually the closed comps. Because if you price a home $20,000 or $30,000 higher than the last one closed at, model match property, you're going to have a trouble having it appraised. So when you're talking about listing presentations, that's something that you bring up. So you've got your home priced and you have not gotten one offer in a month. You've gotten a lot of people coming through at your caravan, and maybe you've held some open houses, and a lot of people like the condition of the property, but they think it's priced too high. You can find this out if you use any sort of showing suite, any sort of feedback program where you send it out to agents who show the home, and they send it back to you, hopefully letting you know what their feedback is. Well, my buyer thought it was too high. Okay, we'll make an offer. Well, we don't want to insult your sellers by making a really low offer. That's okay, make an offer, right? That's all of your negotiating tactics. But if you are having this conversation with your seller and you're letting them know, look, we haven't gotten an offer, we don't even have a nibble, we don't even have lowball offers, we're priced too high. We need to lower the price. You need to issue a modification of terms. The modification of terms form allows you to change the price. It says right there, the listing price, price range, lease, or rental amount shall be changed too. Just draw your attention to the fact that it says lease or rental amount. If you have a lease listing and you lower the price on your lease listing, you still need a modification of terms to do that. You are changing a contract. This is the contract to change the listing contract. Whether it's a residential listing contract or a lease listing contract, what are they called? Manufactured home listing agreement. This is the contract to change that contract. And you need to do that. You can't just arbitrarily say, oh, okay, I have verbal approval to change the listing price. I'm going to lower it in the MLS. Great. For our purposes, for .loop, for compliance, if somebody was to come in and audit a file that had a listing price changed, we would need to have a modification of terms in that file. So you do your modification of terms for price changes. You also do your modification of terms if you change the expiration date of the listing. So if the listing is a 6-month listing and you took it 2 months ago and it's going to expire in 4 months, say you took it 5 months ago, it's going to expire in a month, your seller does not want to cancel the listing, yay, they want to stay with you, but they want to extend the listing out for another 6 months, you're going to do a modification of terms. So you'll change the listing date. You'll hear other, this is where we talked about filling it out for the SELM. It also says right here, all other terms of the listing agreement, buyer representation agreement, or other agreement as applicable remain in full force and effect except as modified herein. So that's telling you buyer representation agreement. Gosh, I guess you could use a modification of terms for something else. You could use it perhaps for an RPA or something else. I wouldn't typically recommend it. Right here, buyer representation agreement, that is the buyer-broker agreement, okay? Buyer-broker agreement is something I talk about when I start doing our purchase agreement module, and we talk about working with buyers. Right now we're talking about working with sellers. So you might see this form show up again when we talk about representing buyers. The buyer-broker agreement used to be a 2 or a 3-page form, it's now a 6-page form. And if you make any changes to the buyer-broker agreement, you're going to use modification of terms to reflect that. Okay, here the parties that need to sign the modification of terms are the listing agent and the principal to the transaction, the seller. Okay,
It's
$5.
It's not ringing. It's just notifying. I'm gonna turn that off.
$5 to KW Cares. Thank you, Penny.
Okay.
Yay.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So any questions about our modification of terms? Any questions at all? We're all good on that? Cool. Let's move on to the cancellation of listing form. We don't like to have to use it, but if you, it happens. There are times when you may be representing a seller, you may be representing a seller, and for some reason, the mojo's just not good. You're not on the same page. You guys aren't seeing eye to eye. The seller really is reticent about lowering the price, and they feel that you should not be asking them to lower the price. You should be doing something else. You should be proactive. You should be marketing it better. You should be doing something better. Whatever the conversation happens, whatever the conversation is that happens that brings you to a place where you need to cancel a listing, and guys, you can choose to cancel a listing on your seller. It's not always the seller that is going to choose to cancel the listing. You can have a conversation with your seller and say, I don't feel I am the right agent for you. We're not, I don't feel we're compatible, however you want to have that conversation. If you feel that you're working with a seller that is not being truthful with you, that is not respecting the fact that you are a professional, that's not hearing the knowledge that you are trying to disseminate to them about the condition of their home, the location, the price. If you feel that you're working with a seller that it's just not going to happen, this is going to turn into what's known as a career listing, you're going to have it for the next 2 years, and then they're going to cancel on you and they're going to go list with somebody else, and that person, that agent's going to say, yeah, I'll take your listing, but we need to lower the price, and then it gets sold in 2 weeks. Happened to me, it does happen. You can choose to cancel the listing yourself. Your seller may ask to be let out of the listing agreement, and that's okay. It's happened to Robert, it happens to everybody. Canceling a listing is not the end of the world. Don't take it as a complete negative. It basically means that you guys aren't on the same page, and your seller may have a friend or a family member or somebody else that they would rather list with. That's okay. Just figure that you're going to cancel a listing at some point in time in your career, and it is not a bad thing. So the cancellation of listing form is what you use. This is the contract that essentially negates the residential listing contract. This is the contract that you and the seller are going to sign that say you are agreeing upon these terms to cancel this listing. Now, if you recall from our residential listing agreement, we have the verbiage, and I'll just go back to it very quickly for illustration purposes. When Robert takes a listing, with a couple of exceptions, this verbiage is in all of his listings. Seller may unconditionally, thank you, unconditionally cancel this agreement at any time, and the commission to be reduced by 1% if I sell this home myself, which basically translates to if I represent the buyer, I will reduce the commission from 5% to 4%. Literally, if I am a dual agent, if I'm representing the buyer as well as you, the seller, I will reduce the commission. Seller may unconditionally cancel this agreement at any time. So we tell our sellers that because the last thing anybody wants to do is to be in a transaction with someone who does not want to be in a transaction with you. This is sort of like a divorce. This is the equivalent of getting out of the relationship. And when we have already written in our listing agreement that you, the seller, our client, may unconditionally cancel this agreement at any time. You change your mind, you don't want to sell. You decide you don't think I'm doing my job, you don't want me to sell your house. You have had a death in the family, something has become extenuating circumstances and is now preventing you from needing to sell your house or preventing you from choosing to sell your home.
How about for no reason whatsoever?
No reason whatsoever. You just, you got a wild hair one day and it came to you in a dream that you should not sell the house, fine.
Yeah.
You want to cancel the listing, fine. Unconditionally, what does that mean to you guys?
No conditions.
No conditions, right. That does not say unconditionally, except for reimbursing us for the money we paid to list your home. It doesn't say that. It says unconditionally. Now, what we don't say is unconditionally at no cost. Oh, geez, I forgot my coffee. Thanks. Let me get some water. So, you can cancel your listings at any time. Okay. Sorry. So for us, when we cancel a listing, we don't even look at what the rest of this form says. We check mark the box. Principal owes no compensation to broker. And we just figure that the photographer cost for $500, the flyers for $100, the munchies we set out at open houses, the food we gave out at Caravan, or the $100 drawing we did at our Caravan is pretty much called a cost of doing business. And if I was teaching a business management class or a business plan class, I would say keep track of that, because you can call that a loss on your income taxes on your business. That's going to be a loss. It's cost of doing business. In manufacturing companies, it's called cost of goods sold. Okay? That's what it takes to actually make your product that you sell. For us, our product is our service, the service that we sell, that we give, that we perform for our clients. Cost of doing business is all of that. Your photos, your caravan, your drawing, your munchies, whatever little things you do. And then, of course, don't forget to factor in your time that you spent sitting at the open houses and all of that, putting out your signs. That's a cost. Do we ask to be reimbursed for that when we cancel a listing? No. Can you? Most certainly. Absolutely. Have I seen cancellation of listings come through that say, yes, I will cancel your listing if you pay me $2,000 because that's what I incurred to market your listing. You can do that. How is that going to go over with the client? Well, they already don't have perhaps, really great thing going with you, great rapport. Is this going to help? Probably not. But you can do it. I've seen it come across. You can cancel a listing and ask to be compensated for your expenditures on that listing. Would I recommend doing it? Not particularly. No, it's not worth it. One of the things that you want to remember when you do cancel a listing, though, is that you can exclude people, and we've done this a handful of times on listings that we had and then canceled and had people that said they might write an offer, but they didn't prior to the listing canceling. They're still thinking about it. If somebody does that, somebody tells you, yes, we're considering writing an offer, and then they change their mind, and then you lose the listing or you cancel the listing for whatever reason, you can exclude that person or persons from the cancellation, because you would be considered procuring cause if those people come forth with an offer. So you can notate that here in item 1B. So if we read through this just real quickly, buyer and principal agree to cancel a listing and terminate their agency relationship, duties and responsibilities with and to each other, subject to the terms and conditions specified below. Check A or B or both. So 1A says principal, who is your seller, agrees to pay broker the amount of compensation specified in the listing contract, in the listing, A, if prior to the end of the listing period specified in the listing or any extension, principal enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property. Okay. Most sellers are not going to agree to that because it is so subject to terms listing below. Okay, so here, okay, they might agree to that. B says within certain calendar number of days after the cancellation of listing or the listing period specified in the listing, principal enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property. Here's the one you want to highlight. To any person named below. All right? So A specifically says that the principal, if the principal agrees to pay broker, so if you want to highlight that first line, principal agrees to pay broker the amount of compensation specified in the listing. What I'm looking at is right there. Okay? So everything after that is now telling you under what conditions will the principal agree to pay the broker. Okay? So A says if prior to the end of listing period specified in listing or any extension, principal enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property. Full stop. If the principal sells the property, they agree to compensate the broker. Most sellers aren't going to do that. They're going to say, well, why am I going to pay you? Because I'm going to have to pay somebody else when I go to list it with someone else. But that's what this box is saying. I wouldn't recommend, and again, you have to make sure that your sellers, your clients, they still are your clients until this is fully executed, understand the form that you're asking them to sign. So, A, you're going to have to explain that to them and say, yeah, you're going to have to pay me compensation regardless. Doesn't matter. If you sell the property, you have to pay me, even though I'm not listing it any longer. B says, if within so many calendar days, we do 180 days, it's a 6-month listing, we do 180 calendar days. So here, and this says, if within 180 calendar days after the cancellation of listing, all right, or to the listing period specified in the listing, don't check mark that box, because if you're 5 months into the listing and the listing is canceled, you only have 1 more month of people that you showed the property to being able to purchase it. If you go beyond that month, this doesn't hold water any longer. So you want to make this for 180 days from the date of the cancellation. That gives you 6 months. If somebody is not going to buy it within 6 months, they're not going to buy it at all. But this will protect you from that perspective. So if the property says otherwise sell the yada yada, otherwise transfer the property to any person named below, or that person's related entity who, after the commencement of the listing and prior to the cancellation, we all know what that means, right? After you listed the property, but prior to when you're canceling the property. 1, physically entered and was shown the property by broker or a cooperating broker, or 2, submitted to seller a signed written offer to acquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on the property. So here on these lines is where you're going to notate the names of those people that you think might come back and write an offer on the property that you are now canceling the listing on. Okay? So C says, in the event of a transaction specified in A or B above, broker has no obligation to represent principal in such transaction. They don't. You don't have to represent the person who wants to buy the property. They have, for all intents and purposes probably, a buyer's broker that they're working with. They have an agent that they're working with. Unless, if you were dual agency, then it would be your client, and then you would have to, I would do a notation on here. If checked other, you can notate something to the effect that you're the agent for that person. But it doesn't have to be you being the agent for the person that came into the property. It just means you're procuring cause. The person went into the property while you had the listing, or you did legitimately, physically take somebody into the property and show them the property. And they were maybe thinking that they might write an offer, but they're not really sure, whatever the situation is. So D says compensation is payable on close of escrow, or if completion of the transaction is prevented by default of seller on seller's default. So that means if the seller defaults, if the seller, for whatever reason, cancels escrow, they're still going to have to pay you. Most sellers aren't going to cancel escrow if they know they have to pay you anyway. And 2, if checked, principal agrees to pay a broker however much percent of the compensation specified in the listing if prior to the end of the listing period specified in the listing or any extension, principal enters into a listing agreement for sale or for the sale or lease of the property with another real estate broker, and 2, principal enters into a contract to sell, convey, lease, or otherwise transfer the property during the listing period specified in listing or any extension. Principal, to B, principal agrees to notify the other real estate broker of the compensation obligation. So in this spot, you're going to notate that you are going to get 2.5% of the amount that the property gets sold for. Now, this can be negotiable. You can negotiate this with your seller. Your seller may say, well, I don't want to pay you 2.5%. I don't think you deserve 2.5%. Whatever argument they're going to come up with, you can negotiate this. You can say a referral fee. You can do, 1%, 1.5%, whatever. I'm pulling 2.5% out because that's what you would have gotten had you kept the listing and it went to, came to fruition and closed escrow. So, item B, make sure you notate this because principal agrees to notify the other real estate broker of the compensation obligation of this paragraph and to pay broker such compensation upon close of escrow. So if this is one of those cases where you just can't really get to a meeting of the minds with your client wants to list with somebody else for some reason, you know that some other broker is going to get this listing, it really does behoove you to send a fully executed copy of this agreement to the new listing broker. Okay? You don't have to. I would highly recommend that you do so. And that listing broker, once you send this form to that listing agent needs to incorporate these people's names that you have notated on the new listing agreement. Okay? We talked about that when we went over our listing agreement. I'll go back to it really quickly for you just so you guys again have the example fresh in your mind, except that I'm going into a weird place here. Okay. So in your transaction, just very briefly, page 1 of your RLA, right here, stipulates, okay, we're on page 1, item F1. Seller represents that seller has not previously entered into a listing agreement with another broker regarding the property unless specified as follows. They need to put your name here. Seller warrants that seller has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker regarding the property unless the property is transferred to any of the following individuals or entities. The names of the people that you notate here on this cancellation of listing need to be put on the new listing agreement. If the seller is not truthful with his new agent, how are you going to know that that agent knows about the procuring cause, that you were procuring cause for certain people and you canceled the listing, you let your seller out of that contract based on the fact that these people are going to incur a compensation. If any of these people notated here buy this property, that's going to incur a compensation due to you that needs to be paid by the new listing broker. The new listing broker is not going to have a clue if your seller does not tell them. You need to send the cancellation of listing to that new listing broker so they know that this was already agreed to and you've got your seller's signature on it.
If I was the new agent and I'd already signed a residential agreement, which you didn't fill that out, would I then do a modification of terms?
I would, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep,
and then
and
that
put
would
down the
stipulate
following people are excluded or going to be owed compensation to, this other broker. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Good point. Absolutely. Thank you. So that's what Paragraph F on the RLA, and it says, if the property is sold to anyone listed above, during the time seller is obligated to compensate another broker. One, broker is not entitled to compensation under this agreement. That means this broker, the broker of this listing agreement, is not entitled to compensation under the agreement. And two, broker is not obligated to represent seller in such transaction. Well, guess what? Who represents the seller then? They're not obligated to, but in more cases than not, they're going to represent the seller. They are. And you would end up falling under the buyer's agency for representation purposes. Have I ever seen that happen? No, I can't say I have. But it could, so you need to be aware of it. And I mean, I have seen plenty of cancellation of listings with people's names on them. If it's ever a problem and then the listing gets listed with somebody else, there's only a problem or a situation that's going to arise if one of the people on this cancellation actually are the buyers of that property. And in that regard, you just need to make sure that you have yourself taken care of and notate them.
Have you seen that happen very often?
No.
Yeah,
No. What I see happen more often than not, Rocky, is I see this form and nothing else is filled in except principal owes no compensation to broker, and it's not going to let me do that until I get rid of the other X's in that box. One of Zip Form's nice little functions there. Because ideally, when we cancel a listing, it's basically, okay, let bygones be bygones, got it, you know, you don't want to work with me, I'm okay with that, not going to charge you anything, we're going to let you cancel, go, be on your way, have a good life, everything's good, right? So that is generally what I see happen. So, and if it sells, it sells, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and you just don't harbor, you know, resentments and stuff about that. It happens. So, any questions on cancellation listing?
Yeah, how, I mean, I imagine it's rare, but where the seller meets the new buyer, they decide to weigh out the contract to eliminate the commission.
Right. How likely is that to happen?
Yeah, how often is that?
I haven't seen that happen because most sellers just want to sell.
Okay.
They want to sell, they want to move on with their lives, they want to go wherever they're headed, and they just want to be done with it. So,
I imagine if there's only like a couple weeks left on it,
right,
they might do that.
Right. They could. And a lot of, you know, you have listings that expire. I mean, that's one of the things that you guys are told to look at as far as lead gen, are expired listings. If a listing expires, that's pretty much it. It expires, 6 months are done, there is no agency, they don't renew it, it's not been canceled, but it's not renewed. The original agent who had it listed has no agency with the seller any longer. The original agent doesn't have a cancellation. They're not excluding anybody from anything. If somebody came in to write an offer with, you know, the new agent, it's going to just be a standard transaction, even though maybe that person saw it when the original listing agent had it, you know. So you can certainly take listings for longer than 6 months. You can take year listings if you feel that is something you would want to do. You can do that. But by and large, if somebody doesn't want to work with you or you don't want to work with them, just cancel the listing, go on your merry way, and figure whatever you spent on that listing is certainly there's a cost that you incurred to it, but you also learned a lot of lessons from it. You learned a lot about people. You learned a lot about dynamics and negotiating tactics and what have you. So you didn't really lose out all the money you think you lost, because everything that you go through is a learning experience. So we did our modification of terms, we did our cancellation of listing. So what was the other one I wanted to do? Property images agreement.
PIA.
Yep, PIA. good old PIA. Apparently there's just a lot of, as I say, confusion about whether this is required or not required. Robert talked at one of our office meetings not too long ago and said every file, this is every listing file that you have needs to have a property images agreement. If you, the caveat on that is if you paid someone to take pictures of your property. If you took pictures yourself, you don't have to have a property images agreement, but you need to be able to substantiate that you did not pay somebody to take the pictures. If you did pay someone to take the pictures, and I've read through this a few times, we don't have a lot of time left in the class, so I can't read through the entire agreement. Basically, this is an agreement between you and the photographer, between you as the listing agent, our office as the listing broker, and the photographer is the principal in this agreement. Why do I have this agreement in with my listing template? Well, clearly it's going to be entered into at a point in time when you have a listing. So that's why it's in the listing agreement, in the listing template. Does the seller ever sign this form? Does the seller even see this form? No. Exactly. It's not a seller is not a party to the contract. This is a contract between you and your photographer, and in essence, it delineates what you own of the photographs that are taken and the rights that you have to those photos. So, depending on who your photographer is, they may prefer to sign. If you look at your term of agreement, okay, description of work, okay, so here is where you're going to put the property address, all right? So if we just go, for our purposes, it's this property, that's the property address. You notice that this does not automatically fill in anything from the cover sheet because we had this form in here when we started the cover sheet, and none of the information from the cover sheet has auto-populated into this form.
Otherwise it would.
It would have,
okay.
Yeah, should have had the address.
Okay.
But not sure if that is something that CAR has decided they don't want to auto-populate for this or not. Date, whatever date that you start entering into talks with somebody. So real estate licensee, this is going to be the name of the firm, which again, is just not auto-populating at all. And because it says licensee, I would highly recommend that you do Keller Williams Exclusive Properties and then your name. So in this case, it would be Robert Harris as the listing agent. And then the photographer, let's say we are going to have Cameron take pictures here. So even, okay, I put Cam in for a reason. Even though Cam is on staff, even though he is our IT person and our agent services guy, he also does photos. He does property photo shoots. He has the drone and everything, and he does that on his own time. He doesn't do it on office time. He does it as essentially an independent contractor, and you would be paying him as if you were paying, I don't know, who else does photos these days? Sean Cordon is the one we used to use a lot, but he's out in Tennessee. Chuck Gloss used to do photos for us occasionally. I don't know. Sergey Dolgi does photos. Whoever you use to do your photos, you need this. You're going to put their name in that line. Description of work, you're going to put the address. Term of the agreement says this agreement shall continue until terminated in writing by either real estate licensee or photographer, or upon delivery to real estate licensee of the images of the identified properties, or at such and such a date. So I would just say it stays in effect until terminated in writing. it opens up kind of a Pandora's box if you put in definitive dates. Compensation and payment. So real estate licensee agrees to pay a photographer in consideration for all services rendered as set forth in this agreement or in accordance with the schedule set forth in the photographer's invoice, or the total amount of is pretty much the easier one to go. You can put down in accordance with the schedule set forth in the photographer's invoice. If you don't know how much you're going to be charged, you can certainly put that down. If you've already talked to your photographer and you've agreed on a set price, you can put that right here. Can you check mark both boxes? Let's see. Nope, apparently not. So it's one or the other, okay? And you can leave it blank. You can just go as set forth in this agreement, except that there's really nothing being set forth in the agreement if you don't put the price down. So I would prefer to actually see a dollar value, because that's just my OCD thing. I want an actual number written in stone. Specifications. Images shall be in reasonable format and quality for internet and print media use. Further specifications regarding number, nature, delivery, etc. of images are set forth below. If you feel the need to specify any further, you can do that here. You can say I'm getting 50 high-res images in .pdf format, and a property-specific website. You know, that's like the 123mainstreet.com. Whatever, it would be 2779annandale.com would be the property-specific website. So that's not too difficult. The grants of rights is where I'm having a lot of agents ask me what to do. Well, guys, I can't tell you what to do. You have to work this out with your photographer. I don't know what your photographer is going to want to agree to, but I can, and what I can do is read this and interpret it for you. However, you guys are all really smart. You passed your real estate license exam. You have to be smart. If you read this agreement, if you read these paragraphs, paragraph A, B, and C, if you read them, you will understand also what they say, and then you can decide how you want to assign the rights of the photos. I'll just read paragraph A as an example. It's an assignment agreement. And paragraph B talks about exclusive license agreement. So A says, photographer hereby irrevocably assigns and transfers to real estate licensee all of photographer's worldwide rights, title, and interest in and to all images, including without limitation all copyrights, whether now existing or hereafter acquired. Photographer agrees to cooperate and take all action reasonably requested by real estate licensee in connection with the assignment of photographer's rights to real estate licensee under this agreement, including executing and delivering to real estate licensee all documents or providing information pertaining to the images specifically but without limitation. Photographer agrees to assist in filing copyright applications in the United States or elsewhere if requested by real estate licensee. Okay, not so bad there. That's just fine. Or you can say B, exclusive license agreement. Photographer hereby grants to real estate licensee an exclusive worldwide royalty-free license in perpetuity to reproduce, distribute, display, prepare derivative works of, and publicly inform, etc., etc., etc. To that end, photographer agrees to provide any information necessary to prepare any copyright applications, etc., etc. And that's pretty much it. You can say, applicable to 4A and B, that the parties agree to grant photographer a limited license to use the images for his or her own portfolio. So if you check mark this box, you're not agreeing to allowing the photographer to use your property's images as works for them to show other agents, this is what I do. That's their marketing. Your property's images now become the photographer's marketing tools to market himself or herself so that they can show this is an example of the work I do. No harm in doing that. I can't see any photographer who would agree to anything if you didn't let them do that. Yeah.
No.
I would just, you bump into a celebrity,
Right, exactly.
right?
Exactly.
Just based on privacy.
Right, exactly. Good
Have
point.
you ever seen it where the seller is actually the photographer?
I have not, well, we've had this form in existence, but yes, I have had sellers that say, I'm an amateur photographer and I want you to use my pictures. Fine, please use your pictures.
So would they still have to fill out this
Are you
form?
paying them?
No.
So the main thing to remember about this contract is the word, where is it, made, entered into, somewhere in here we talk about consideration, okay? So compensation and payment up there, if there is no consideration, you don't have a legal agreement with anybody.
Okay.
If there is no consideration, if money has not changed hands, if there is no consideration. So basically, if I was going to recommend something to somebody on this one, I would say checkmark box B, and don't checkmark this box, and don't checkmark that you're not going to indemnify, that the photographer shall indemnify, defend, hold harmless, which basically this clause right here is for your safety, because if the photographer takes pictures of something that they shouldn't take pictures of, or they reproduce images that are already copywritten, if images that your photographer uses in your virtual tour are subject to copyright laws and somebody comes after somebody, this says the somebody is going to come after the photographer, not you. Because the photographer is going to indemnify you if they use images that they shouldn't be using. Okay? Additional terms, yada yada. Broker identity and rights. Right here it says real estate brokerage firm, so you're putting in the name of the firm. You put in the office DRE number, not yours. And by signing below, everybody agrees, and yada yada. So that's the property images agreement. If you pay somebody to take pictures of your property, you need to have the property images agreement. Janice will not process your file. You will not get paid if you do not have the PIA in your file. Any questions on that one? Cool. So let's just go really quickly. Our KW addendum, I'm not going to belabor the issue on that one too much. You guys have already read it. I think you know what it says. If you're not sure about what it says, let me know. In our real estate listing agreement, in our seller's advisory, is where I ask you to notate the $250 Keller Williams archiving fee, file archiving fee. If you want to get really fancy, you can say pursuant to the attached Keller Williams addendum, page 1, paragraph 6, file archiving fee is where we talk about the $250. So that I notate in the listing agreement and in the seller's advisory underneath other. And I have also asked you guys to do that in your template, in your residential listing template, so that it's automatically there when you take a listing. I want that paragraph in the RLA to be, that's okay, to be notated, so that when they see the Keller Williams addendum, they know specifically what it's talking about. So 4 pages, Keller Williams addendum, and then we had to add this affiliated business arrangement disclosure statement notice. So here, we're calling it the ABAD, A-B-A-D, affiliated business arrangement disclosure. You can also refer to it as the KW affiliated business disclosure, whatever, however you want to refer to it, however makes the most sense for you, but you need to have this in every file, not just files where our escrow is being used. You need this affiliated business disclosure arrangement on every file. just like when you go, you have a listing, or rather you have a buyer, and Troop or C21 Everest, as they are now, Pinnacle, whoever has the listing, they have their office disclosures. An affiliated business disclosure is part of that office disclosure that they are giving you. And your seller signs it even, or your buyer signs it, even though Century 21 is not representing your buyer. Your buyer signs the Keller Williams addendum because they are being represented by Keller Williams. The seller signs the Keller Williams addendum just to acknowledge receipt of it. They are not being represented by us. They do not owe us the $250. Same with the affiliated business arrangement disclosure. Needs to be in all files. So again, DIA, PIA, ABAD, those all have been reflected in the transaction control sheet on the intranet. So if you go to the intranet, look under docs, there's an Excel spreadsheet, that's the transaction control sheet that my daughter and I put together, and it has these new forms reflected in it. When you go into .loop, you'll see placeholders for the DIA, for the PIA, and for the Keller Williams affiliated business disclosure arrangement as well. If you do not have these forms in your files, Janice will not release your checks. So, any questions?
Yeah, can you repeat where you find it?
On the office intranet. So log into your kw.com, go to the box in that you see a bunch of stuff. At the bottom it says click here to go to the intranet. That link will take you to the office intranet, and then you go to documents within the office intranet. M can show you really quickly how to get there. So the transaction control sheet has been updated. .loop placeholders have been updated, and you need to have all of these forms in there. Any other questions? Good? Nope. Great. Well, I'd like to see, what are we, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 today. That's better than last time. Cool. Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Right.